Hello everyone, this is Michael Wetzel, and I'm here to show you my presentation on King Arthur and his compounded history. There are 5 main works that you need to know about when it comes to King Arthur. You have the Annales Cambriae, or the Annals of Wales, written in the 900s. You have the Historia Regum Britanniae in 1136, meaning the history of British kings. You have the writings of Chrétien de Troyes in the 1160s to the 1190s. You have a collection known as the Vulgate Cycle, written by a variety of artists from the 1210s to the 1230s. And then finally, you have La Mort d'Arthur around 1485, and it means the death of Arthur. For some context, England used to be a Roman territory, and in about 410 AD, the Romans leave Britannia, or Britain as we now know it, to deal with their own problems in Rome. About 60 years later, a slew of problems hit them, and Rome falls in 476 AD. And that leaves a power vacuum in Rome, and that leads to a lot of fighting between previously Roman lands. One of those conflicts happens in England, where the native Britons have to fend off the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, who are of Scandinavian origin. There are tales of that time among the Britons that there was this valiant hero named Arthur who may not have existed. We're not 100% sure. He may be a compilation of different stories under one name. But in the 900s, people in England wanted to compile their history, and they came up with this system, the Annals. The Annals Cambriae, meaning the Annals of Wales, and it came in the format you see over here on the right. This is the page for the 500s, and it goes year by year, and it tries to explain what happened in each year, what important thing happened each year. About halfway down the document is one of the first mentions of Arthur's name. It mentions that there's a man named King Arthur, and there's a man named Mordred, and the two were in battle, and they both died. It doesn't provide a lot of context at all. It doesn't explain who King Arthur is. It does not explain who Mordred is. It doesn't even mention what battle they were in. It just mentions that they both died. And these events happened in the 500s, so even when this document was made in the 900s, it's a bit gray on whether it really happened or not. But later on, in 1136, Gregory of Monmouth, who you see on the right over there, he makes a pseudo-history, as it's called the Historia Regum Britanniae, or the History of British Kings. And it provides the context and the story of Arthur's life. It talks about his father, Uther Pendragon, and how he conspired with Merlin to eventually have a child, or to help him have a child, rather, who would grow up to be Arthur. Arthur he's a really good king. When he takes the throne at age 15, or sorry, he takes the throne, I believe, at 13, and by the age of 15, he has conquered all of the British Isles, most of Scandinavia, and he's marched on to what is now France, thereby declaring war on Rome, which in this version of the story, he's able to fend off Rome. But while he's in France, his nephew, by his half-sister, Mordred, he usurps the English throne, and when Arthur returns, he fights him in the Battle of Camlan, and he is killed, quote-unquote. Some people say he's killed, some people say he's mortally wounded. Either way, Arthur is swept off to a magical island named Avalon, and he is healed by these 9 sisters, the Fae sisters. The main one you need to know is Morgan. She'll become important later. But it's stated that Arthur he's now alive on Avalon. He's just lying in wait until England really needs him. Imagine if George Washington was just sort of dead, and he would come back if America was in deep, deep duty. Later on, you have a French writer by the name of Chrétien de Troyes, and he takes on the story of Arthur. His largest addition is the character of Sir Lancelot du Lac. And Lancelot embodies a lot of the ideas that were coming into Europe this time, specifically the idea of courtly love. Now, these ideas of courtly love, they come into Europe and into England by way of the Crusades, because the First Crusade around this time is just ending. So a lot of soldiers are bringing back Middle Eastern ideas and incorporating them into their own lives. I have it on the handout over here. The 4 elements of courtly love that you need to know about, and that were prevalent in Islamic literature at the time, are love for love's sakes, meaning even as long as there's love, it's worth pursuing. There's exaltation of the beloved lady, meaning that you should treat your lady as a goddess. She's elegant, she's beautiful, she's immaculate, blah, 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 I love her, blah, blah, blah. There's the ennobling power of love, the idea that by default, being in love makes you more noble than someone who isn't. And finally, you have the love as a desire never to be fulfilled. The idea that it's super noble to have someone that you're in love with, but you can't because it's wrong. And that's, all of those come together in Lancelot because he's having an affair, or I'll whisper it to you, Lancelot's having an affair with Arthur's wife, Guinevere. So it's seen as super, super romantic and super chivalrous that Lancelot has this affair that he has to keep secret, because he has to keep it secret from his best friend. Cletien also introduces a grail, not the Holy Grail, not yet, just a grail, a super good cup. But he has a guy named Percival go on a quest for the grail, and Chrétien dies before he can finish the quest. Or Percival can finish the quest, so it's left open to interpretation in later, by later pieces. He takes the character of Morgan, who heals Arthur and Avalon. He makes them an adversary who wants to overthrow Arthur. Later on, Morgan reforms her past evil ways to become the person that heals Arthur and Avalon. But again, Cletien dies before some of his work can be finished. And that takes us to the Vulgate cycle, written from the 1210s to the 1230s. This is where King Arthur gets a lot of its Christian elements. It becomes super, super Christian. It makes the Grail that Chrétien made, it makes it the Holy Grail. It explains Merlin as an attempt at the Antichrist, but because he was baptized, that kind of gets averted, but he keeps some magical powers. So that's their explanation for his magical powers. The Vulgate cycle also introduces the idea of the sword and the stone being the thing that makes Arthur king, whereas in past versions he just kind of became king by birthright. In this version he had to prove himself by pulling the sword. There is some discrepancies on what Arthur's sword is called, whether it's Excalibur or Caliburn. It doesn't really matter. It's just his super good sword. In past versions, Arthur had a sword. It was just super good. Might have been called Caliburn, which comes from the Welsh word Calfan, which just means sword. That's great, isn't it? Or there's the Latin version, Caliburnus. It also means sword. But the sword and the stone idea is just that he had to pull a sword from the stone, and that proved that he was the king of Britain. He was the successor to Uther Pendragon. Another thing that the Vulgate cycle does is introduces the character of Galahad. And he's introduced to just be, like, if you remember how Lancelot was introduced to be better than Arthur, Galahad was introduced to be better than Lancelot. And better meaning more Christian, he's more valiant, he's more chivalrous, blah, 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 blah. He gets his own sword like Arthur does, but his is cooler. In this version, Galahad is the one who actually finds the Grail, and he actually gets immediately taken to heaven, so the Grail is never to be seen again. The Vulgate cycle also, because it's more Christian, adds consequences to Lancelot having an affair. Lancelot actually finds the Grail before Galahad does, but Lancelot is rejected by the Grail because he was an adulterer. And eventually, it comes to Arthur having... This version, yes, Morgan is still evil, but later reforms. And then at some point, Arthur goes and meets with Morgan, and Morgan reveals the affair that Lancelot and Guinevere have been having. Lancelot flees to France, where he's originally from, and Arthur goes to go to find him. And in the space where he's gone, Mordred usurps the throne. You get the idea. When but he comes back, Arthur's killed, blah 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 blah. But this version of the tale kind of points the blame for the fall of Camelot at Lancelot. So, like I said, adds consequence. I wanted to point out in the top image you hear, the center is Galahad. Like I was saying, he's the golden boy of the story, so that's why they put him in the center. Look, King Arthur's off to the side. It's weird. But later we come to Le Mort d'Arthur, or The Death of Arthur. It's the version that's known for putting all of these stories into French, the language at the time. It introduces the Lady of the Lake, the person who's known for, like, thrusting the sword out of the water to hand Arthur. This version says that, yes, Arthur did pull a sword from a stone, but Excalibur is gotten from the Lady of the Lake. So that's why there's so much discrepancy with that. Like I said there, Arthur gets Excalibur from the Lady of the Lake, and this also adds more backstory to Lancelot being this, like, exiled French prince and being trained as a knight by the Lady of the Lake and eventually taken to King Arthur's court.